I think they just want to deepen ties of friendship and cooperation, particularly economic cooperation and also cultural interaction and cooperation at a more people to people level, so that there's deeper integration between the two sides. But I think the most, for me at least, one of the most important points coming out of this summit is not just about that they are meeting and reaching these agreements, but the very fact of the timing of this summit. And the fact is that this summit is happening at the same time as the G7 summit is happening. And at the G7 summit, one of the key issues at that summit is, of course, about Ukraine. And this is a statement that China is making by hosting the Central Asian presidents in terms of supporting the territorial integrity of each of these Central Asian states in an implicit way, considering that many or some of these Central Asian states have significant Russian populations, and there is a certain analogy with the Ukraine situation. So I think it's a big statement being made in that regard. Remember, when President Xi made his first visit out after COVID, he went to Kazakhstan. And at this very point of time, again, when the G7 is happening, we have the Chinese special envoy meeting Mr. Zelensky. So there's a lot of symbolism out here in terms of the timing of this meeting, aside from just deepening these core ties these ties of relationships with Central Asian countries.
I do want to make a comment about this situation with respect to Russia. I think we have to be a little bit cautious about making the relationship China versus these five countries as sort of a substitute relationship for the relationship between Russia and these countries. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, it's framed like this a lot, as I've seen in several Western medias. But I think I do admit that these countries do have a concern about their territorial integrity in terms of if there is anything similar to what happened to Ukraine. But I think it's a little bit of a stretch of imagination. I think it's far from that. And I think China and Russia both understand that their operations or their existence in this region doesn't have to be us against them. I think China maintains good relationships with Russia as well as these five countries. I just want to be cautious about making that analogy to the Ukraine situation. It's not a good analogy in my view.
I agree with whatever John said, and I wasn't trying to overemphasize that. And we have to remember, all the Central Asian presidents, all or most of them, were in Russia just 2 weeks or a week back for the Victory Day parade. So whatever their misgivings might be, they were there in Russia. And that's why also in my initial comments, I mentioned that China is trying to deepen its ties economically and culturally, but not strategically. China has been very, very careful that in terms of strategic relationships, Russia is number one in the region and will stay that way. And China is not planning to prod the bear in any respect in regards to that, because they know how to share the region and share the region to the benefit of the smaller states in the region. So I completely agree with John, but I do find a certain bit of symbolism in the timing in China trying to make certain statements. And I think those statements are valid and are important ones, because China has important roles to play in the world in many regards.